Hi everyone! Welcome to my exploration and analysis of Anne Shirley from the book series Anne of Green Gables. Here's a short synopsis for context. Anne is an 11-year-old orphan girl in the late 19th century, sent by mistake to and subsequently adopted by two middle-aged siblings, Matthew and Marilla Cuthbert. They had originally intended to adopt a boy to help them on their farm in the fictional town of Avonlea in Prince Edward Island, Canada. Today, we'll explore various aspects of Anne's personality, uncovering the enchanting, albeit unusual, mind of this remarkable character. Anne is one of my absolute favorite fictional characters, and I hope you'll be able to see why by the end of this video, if you don't already love her. Let's get started. There are countless depictions of Anne, from movies to shows, but Anne is an embodiment of imagination and curiosity in every single version without fail. You may have noticed this sounds a whole lot like the openness to experience trait from the Big Five personality model, and if you haven't, don't worry. Let's briefly define the trait. Openness to experience reflects a person's inclination towards novelty, variety, and an appreciation for the richness of inner and outer experiences. We're going to explore how Anne's openness to experience manifests in her character. Let's take a look at this clip.
Kinda pretty.
Oh, pretty doesn't seem the right word to use, nor beautiful either. They don't go far enough. It's wonderful. Wonderful. The first thing I ever saw that couldn't be improved upon by the imagination.
One of the very first impressions Anne makes on the audience is this scene. In the book, upon her first meeting with Matthew, her adoptive father, she says, quote unquote, "Isn't it splendid to think of all the things there are to find out about? It just makes me feel glad to be alive. It's such an interesting world. It wouldn't be half so interesting if I knew all about everything, would it? There'd be no scope for imagination then, would there?" Anne's imagination runs wild on everything and everyone she comes upon. She makes fanciful descriptions of places and creates vivid stories straight from her imagination. This is consistent with a high score in openness to experience in the Big Five model. Here are some more quotes from the book that I think demonstrate Anne's openness to experience. Marilla says to Anne, quote unquote, "I think you'd better learn to control that imagination of yours, Anne, if you can't distinguish between what is real and what isn't." This shows Anne's inclination towards imagination and fantasy, so much so that she gets lost in her own fantasy world. This connects to the motive perspective. The motive perspective looks at how behavior reflects underlying needs, and Anne's traumatizing childhood experiences in an orphanage is reflected in her need for escapism. Anne says, quote unquote, "Don't you just love poetry that gives you a crinkly feeling up and down your back?" This shows Anne's appreciation for art and beauty and her tendency to be very intellectually curious. This is also supported by the motive perspective, in that Anne tends to romanticize everything in an attempt to make her difficult yet bland life more interesting. Anne says, quote unquote, "How are you going to find out about things if you don't ask questions?" Anne says this after the adults in her life tire of her relentless questioning about everything. This shows Anne's natural curiosity and readiness to question existing norms, and is also connected to the motive perspective, since Anne is motivated by a desperate need to feel heard after being ignored and abandoned in her early childhood. I think these quotes really represent Anne's openness to experience as supported by the motive perspective. Next, we're going to explore one of Anne's most defining traits, her unwavering optimism. From the trait perspective, optimism is a personality trait associated with a positive expectation for the future. Anne's optimism is evident in her ability to find silver linings, maintain hope, and see the beauty in even the most challenging situations. Let's explore some specific instances where Anne shows her optimism. When Anne wakes up the first morning after being mistakenly adopted by Matthew and Marilla, she thinks, quote unquote, "First came a delightful thrill as something very pleasant, then a horrible remembrance. This was Green Gables, and they didn't want her because she wasn't a boy." When Marilla comes to get her to send her back to the orphanage, Anne says to Marilla, quote unquote, "I've just been imagining that it was really me you wanted after all, and that I was to stay here forever and ever. It was a great comfort while it lasted. This quilt demonstrates her optimism in a situation that makes her feel both disappointed and devastated. Anne does not cry, does not make a scene, instead choosing to focus on the positives of the situation, of how staying at Green Gables for just one night was, quote unquote, a great comfort while it lasted. When Marilla takes Anne on a wagon ride in an attempt to send Anne back to the orphanage, Anne says to Marilla, quote unquote, "I've made up my mind to enjoy this ride. It's been my experience that you can nearly always enjoy things if you make up your mind firmly that you will." Despite the destination, Anne remains optimistic, turning this ride into an opportunity for growth and learning. How does Anne's optimism relate to the trait perspective? Well, in the trait perspective, optimism is correlated with positive psychological outcomes. Anne's optimistic nature aligns with research suggesting that optimistic individuals often experience better mental well-being. Anne does not let the inert negativity of being sent back to the orphanage bring her down. She remains optimistic and, consistent with trait correlations, experiences a better mental state. Another aspect of the trait perspective is trait stability. After Anne is officially adopted by Matthew and Marilla, she attends school and receives excellent grades, receiving an offer for a prestigious scholarship to continue her studies at university. However, her plans are brutally interrupted when Marilla starts to lose her eyesight. Anne expresses her thoughts after deciding to give up the prestigious Avery Scholarship in order to care for Marilla at home. She says, quote unquote, "I don't know what lies around the bend, but I'm going to believe that the best does. It has a fascination of its own, that bend. And I shall give life here my best, and I believe it will give its best to me in return." These quilts communicate Anne's optimism in the face of uncertainty at age 16, consistent with the same optimism she felt at age 11 when being taken back to the orphanage. Anne's consistent display of optimism aligns with the trait perspective's view that certain personality traits remain relatively stable over time. Now, let's shift our focus to the learning perspective and understand how Anne's optimism is shaped by her learning experiences. Let's consider Anne's social learning experiences. Her interactions with positive role models such as Marilla and Matthew contribute to the reinforcement of optimistic attitudes. When Anne questions Marilla about her insecurity, Marilla reassures her. Let's take a look at this short clip.
Marilla, do you never wish you'd adopted a boy like you intended to? He could have run this farm, saved you all this trouble.
And Shirley, I wouldn't trade you for a dozen boys. I'll miss you.
Anne's cognitive learning processes also contribute to Anne's optimism. Anne says to Marilla, quote unquote, "Well, that is another hope gone. My life is a perfect graveyard of buried hopes." That's a sentence I read in a book once, and I say it over to comfort myself whenever I'm disappointed in anything. Anne's continuous exposure to literature and her ability to construct optimistic narratives from a young age contribute to the development and reinforcement of her optimism. The final topic we are going to discuss today is attachment style. Attachment style refers to the emotional bonds individuals form with others, particularly in relationships. For Anne Shirley, her attachment style plays a significant role in her interactions with her caregivers, Marilla and Matthew, and her friends. The basic idea for attachment is that responsive caregivers in early childhood creates a sense of security and safety for the infant. Anne spends her early years in an orphanage where she is neglected. Given that lack of security and a responsive caregiver, Anne displays an ambivalent or anxious attachment style. This attachment style is supported in this short excerpt. "I don't dare go out," said Anne. "If I can stay here, there is no use in my loving Green Gables. And if I go out there and get acquainted with all these trees and flowers and the orchid and the brook, I'll not be able to help loving it. It's hard enough now, so I won't make it any harder. I want to go out so much. Everything seems to be calling to me. Anne, come out to us. Anne, we want a playmate. But it's better not. There is no use in loving things if you have to be torn from them, is there?" Anne has a fear of forming an attachment to the nature and people of Green Gables. She is anxious about forming attachment. This is consistent with the ambivalent anxious attachment style and her belief that love does not last. Ambivalent attachment style is also associated with extreme emotional highs and lows, and Anne displays this when she first finds out about Marilla's intention to send her back to the orphanage. She says to Marilla, quote unquote, "I'm in the depth of despair." Yet, the next morning, she is completely changed when she says to Marilla, quote unquote, "I'm not in the depth of despair this morning. I never can be in the morning. Isn't it a splendid thing that there are mornings?" Our course content suggests that initial attachment style can be off-putting, making it very difficult for those with insecure attachments to form a more secure attachment later in life. However, I believe that Matthew and Marilla's consistent care and reassurance play a pivotal role in fostering Anne's secure attachment in her later life. Her caregivers are reliable and supportive, and this creates a sense of trust and helps Anne develop a secure attachment. Referring back to the clip I played earlier, Marilla assures Anne that she is loved and appreciated. Let's take a second to watch another short clip.
Every little while, this horrible, sickening feeling would come over me, and I'd be so afraid that this was all a dream. But I just had to one more time. This is real. Green Gables is real, and we're home.
Anne had previously been let down by all the important figures in her life. Before she met Matthew and Marilla, no one in her life watched out for her. When she finally realizes she will not be abandoned again, she starts to develop a more secure attachment style. In the books, she says, quote unquote, "It's lovely to be going home and know it's home," she said. "I love Green Gables already, and I never loved any place before. No place ever seemed like home." Let's explore some instances when Anne displays secure attachment. Several years after Anne is adopted, Matthew passes away. Anne says to Marilla, quote unquote, "Stay here for a little while with me and keep your arm round me, like so. It's our sorrow, yours and mine. Oh, Marilla, what will we do without him?" And Marilla says to Anne, "We've got each other, Anne." Anne displays secure attachment here in that she trusts and finds comfort in the safe haven that Marilla has become to her. Before coming to Green Gables, Anne had an imaginary friend named Katie, whom she would take comfort in to soothe her loneliness, since she did not have any trustworthy people in her life. Anne says, quote unquote, "I used to pretend that my reflection was another little girl. I called her Katie Maurice, and we were very intimate. Katie was the comfort and consolation of my life. Katie Maurice would have taken me by the hand and led me out into a wonderful place, and we would have lived there happy forever after. When I went to live with Mrs. Hammond, it just broke my heart to leave Katie Maurice. She felt it dreadfully, too. I know she did, for she was crying when she kissed me goodbye through the bookcase door." As Anne begins to feel more comfortable and secure with her new life and friends, she bids farewell to her imaginary friend. She develops a close friendship with Diana, and their friendship is depicted as trusting, strong, happy, and lasting well into the rest of their lives. These qualities of a relationship are associated with secure attachment, supporting the idea that Anne's ambivalent attachment style developed into a secure attachment. Overall, Anne's openness to experience and optimism make her a fun and lively protagonist, while her character development throughout the story allows us to see her change from an insecure, anxious child to a mature, trusting young adult, and overcome her traumatizing past. Thank you for joining me on this journey into Anne's mind. Just as Anne found kindred spirits in Avonlea, I hope you found a connection to the psychological traits that make her character so endearing. In the spirit of Anne, let's face our own challenges with an open and optimistic attitude, embracing the adventures that await, being pruned and branched throughout our lives, but always remaining true to ourselves.